All right. Welcome back to the Asking for a Friend podcast. Again, my name is William. This is my wife, Jul, and we are here to answer your questions on all things relating to biblical marriage, dating, engagement, parenting as Christians in the world that we live in. So it's been a blast. We're excited. So we have a couple questions we're going to dig into today.
Yes, and just as William was saying, we've loved your feedback. We've loved your questions. Keep them coming. So we hope that this is helpful.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. I'm going to jump in.
Okay.
Question number one. In Sunday's sermon, Ben spoke on conflict in marriage, the common communication struggle of being heard or not heard by your spouse. My husband and I struggle with this and often have unresolved conflict, but then he wants to be intimate and I am put off by not feeling heard and frankly don't want to have sex after an unresolved argument. How can we work through this?
Ooh, big question.
Never dealt with this in my life.
Big attention grabber. But this honestly is a great question.
Yeah.
I honestly think so many people struggle with this, throughout some point in their marriage, in their relationship, for sure. We have struggled with this for sure. And, this is something that, like we say in prior podcasts, assumptions can kill intimacy. They can create so much frustration. Mm-hmm. So when you assume what the other person is thinking, you assume what the intentions are, they're just very detrimental. So what I would say, as a wife speaking to a husband, and this certainly can go both ways.
Sure.
The first thing to do is work on the communication and conflict piece before trying to address the intimacy or the sex piece. Because that's probably where the problem is starting.
Sure.
So you can't fix one without the other, right? In real life setting, what you don't want to do is end a conversation, end a conflict without really resolving it.
Sure.
The point of that is not to, okay, white flag, I surrender, you win, you're right, throw the towel in. That resolves nothing.
Sure.
Just like with parenting, with kids, with employee at work, that doesn't resolve anything. So it's truly to get a mutual understanding from the other person. Yeah. And I really like in Ben's sermon how he, explained this and okay, well, I've said this and, I need to be heard. I feel like you're not hearing me. Well, I feel like you're not hearing me back. So I don't want to hear you before you're hearing me. And it turns into this almost comical cycle that we do. So one thing William and I talked about and do and have done is practice that. Okay, what I think I'm hearing you say is da 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 da, repeating it back. You're allowing for clarification, further discussion, so that you guys can get on the same page and have a truly mutual understanding. So. Yeah. And like Ben referenced, on Sunday, 67% of divorces and separation, the key cause is communication.
Correct.
So if you aren't working on this or having ways that you're resolving it, and then all these, conflicts and conversations just end and they're abrupt and they're unhappy, your wife or your spouse isn't going to want to have sex with you. They do not feel close to you. Intimacy is more than just that. It's about feeling close to that person.
And I'd say this, we talk, or Ben has said this a lot when it comes to marriage and biblical marriage and what that looks like. It's a race to the bottom. It's a race to the bottom. And so men, ultimately, it's our job to be at the bottom as we lead our family. So when you talk about this, the conflict and the communication issue and then the sex issue, right? Hey, most likely it's the male that has the sex issue. Or the husband that has the sex issue. It's the wife that has the communication conflict issue, right? So, hey, die to yourself. Let's deal with the conflict piece before we deal with the sex piece.
Yep.
And that's the best way you can love and serve your wife, is to say, I really want to deal with this. I really want to talk about this, but I'm going to die to myself right now, and we're going to figure this part out first.
Great point. Absolutely. And hold each other accountable. I think for us and for other people, you have these conversations, you're like, okay, we're going to do better. And we think of these things,
Sure.
And then you get back into the same pattern, or the same problem keeps coming up. And it's like, okay, you're not really listening. Nothing's really changing. Like, hold each other to that, to really start to see like, oh, this is making a difference. And we are getting on the same page, and we're staying on the same page, and we're dealing with it better. Like, and husbands, when your wives are heard and they feel, heard and valued and all of this cared for by the person that they love the most and they're closest to, like, the sex life will follow.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is the way God designed sex in marriage, we're going to get into this in a sermon in a couple weeks, but sex is designed for between one man, one woman in the covenant of marriage. Everything outside of that is technically sexual immorality. Okay. So that's the design for sex. And the way God designed us as humans, sex is more than just mating like it is for an animal or anything, right?
Sure.
There's an emotional connection. There's not just a physical connection. There's a spiritual connection. So many elements. So if you just treat it like it's a physical thing, you miss out completely on what God designed it to be, and the emotional, the spiritual, the relational piece that is strengthened and built there.
Sure.
Through your entire marriage. But maybe we'll get that in another podcast. Maybe we'll get to it in a sermon. We'll see.
Sure. Yeah. Big first question, but a really
great.
good one.
And last thing I'll add to that is, to your point of like, don't just throw in the towel. Any argument, and whether it's this or anything else, the goal is not to win the argument. Let's just start there. The goal is to be a team and to figure out a solution to the problem. So if that is your mindset going into whatever the issue is, that completely changes how you approach it from both sides, rather than, I just want to win this thing.
Yeah.
And I want to be heard. Let's get to the root of this. Let's figure this out.
Right. And the opposite is true as well. Like, if you always want to win, that's nobody wins.
Yep.
And if you always let your spouse win because you don't want to deal with it and you don't want to resolve it, nobody wins there either. So just keep both in mind.
I never do that. I don't know what you're talking about.
Next question. Okay. So we are coming up on the holidays, which is always a conflict point for families. It's been that for us sometimes, especially dealing with families, boundaries, in-laws,
Sure.
all the components. It's not always holly and jolly.
Yeah.
So how are some ways that you can handle that?
Sure. Great question. Holidays are always tricky, especially in those early years, as you're first married and you're creating new traditions, new plans. You're combining two different family traditions into to try to make your own.
Sure.
And so I'd say first thing is, remember this: you have left your father and mother. You have become one. You have, like, husbands, you have left your mom and dad. Wives, you have left your mom and dad, and you guys have started your own family. Mm-hmm. So everything that was previously done in either family, let's be real, is now on the table to be cut, to not be a part of your new, to
or
be
look
changed.
Different.
Correct. And so I think starting with that in mind, I think a difficult part, if you are a grandparent listening out there too, like mother-in-laws know that, man, your daughter or your son is no longer a part of your family and now has started his own family. And so there's a lot of tension, not just between you and your wife. There's now tension between you and your parents, or you or your spouse and their parents, or whatever it is. So all that to say, recognize it can be messy, and it can get crazy. So
yes, and not, I know that you did not mean this. You still are a part of your family that you came from, but it does look differently. And what I think is hard for this is, I think that the families, the parents and the siblings, they have their own expectations for you guys.
Sure.
In addition to your expectations for you guys. I think the tendency is to say, oh, well, now you're part of the London crew. So this is everything that we do, and join us. And you say, well, no, you're part of the Colle crew now. So come and join us. And this is what we do.
Yep.
these are good conversations to have before you get married. PSA. So I would start there, but
Great marriage counseling subject that we always tackle.
It is. It's true. It seems silly and it seems like an easy topic. You're like, holidays are fun, and they are,
premarital counseling is what I meant.
Premarital counseling. But it is. It's a big conversation because a lot of things happen. And, you know, a lot of people don't have great relationships with their own family or with their in-laws because of things like this that start off early. So have the conversation with each other.
Yeah. Have a conversation. And I'd say have a conversation early, right? What's today? It's middle of October. You should have already probably had conversations around Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, what those things look like. You know, they're on the horizon. Like, preemptively have those conversations, because inevitably we delay it. We know it's on the horizon. We just kind of think, we'll kind of see what happens. So I'll tell you what's going to happen. It's going to be a big blow up.
It's not
going to be fun.
Sure.
And so, you know, I'd say for us, like, both of our families live in town, right? So there was an element of, I'd say, those first couple years of trying to please everyone. We're trying to please my parents. We're trying to please your parents. So-and-so's in town for this or that, or whatever the case is. And we had to come to, you know, have some hard conversations with ourselves or with each other and with our parents of just kind of like, okay, this is what we're doing. Probably the biggest is when we started having kids, we said, Christmas is at our house. Like, we are doing Christmas at our house. We're not leaving. You guys are welcome to join us.
Sure.
We would actually love for you to join us, but we cannot because we can't go to your parents in the morning, my parents in the afternoon, and, you know, whatever. And then the kids are exhausted and it's not fun for anyone. So it's all about having those conversations. I know a lot of people that with family out of town, it's rotating where you go for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever the case is. So.
Absolutely. No, and exactly. Talking about those early, you know, and like, it's kind of like your role. It's William's role to talk to his family about it and kind of start laying the groundwork early. And you might start, and you've been married for 10 years, 20 years, you know, in some of these conversations, like, yeah, you know, we can start now, but yes. And you kind of are that buffer between your family and saying, hey, hey, this season of life has changed for us because X, Y, and Z, or the kids are now older, or the kids are younger, whatever. You don't have kids yet, and laying that groundwork, telling your parents, your family, those expectations. It just helps everybody to ease into it and to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Correct. And you will compromise. You have to compromise. Your holidays will look different than how they looked when you were a kid or when you were growing up or before you got married.
Sure.
100%. Right. So know that going into it. And I would say this, like, to the grandparents out there or the future grandparents out there, you have a unique role in being able to continue to parent your kids, but be able to support your kids and as they parent.
Absolutely.
Like, that's a massive transition and a whole nother subject of, you know, as the kids become parents and the parents become grandparents, there's a shift for everyone that's involved.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, I heard a guy say this, and both of our parents do a phenomenal job of this. We're very thankful for that example of, man, they're so helpful, and they're helpful as grandparents in so many ways, but they still allow us to parent.
Yes.
And so they come along and say, hey, I want to do this, but only if you want, or if that's cool with you guys, or if that would be helpful, or whatever the case. They allow us to make those decisions as the parents, not trying to parent as grandparents.
Yes. And so that's great for, parent listeners, grandparent listeners, like, create that space. You still have influence in your kids, and enjoy that space and support them in those ways. It's helping grow your family, your younger family, you know, and seeing that. So such beauty in that, for sure.
No, it's awesome. All right. Next question.
Okay.
We have multiple children, and they're all involved in various sports and activities, which often cuts into family time, church time, etc. We can relate to this. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to this question. The question is, how do you let your kids be involved, but also make our family and God the priority?
We'll let you know when we figure it out. Obviously, this is a big, big thing, and really has to have a mindset of like countercultural in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
For us, what is helpful is to constantly remember and keep our eyes on what is the big picture for our
Correct.
kids.
Yeah. What's the goal for our kids? What is the big picture goal that we are aiming towards? Yeah.
Yes. So is that big picture to raise professional athletes? Is it to raise, kids who focused on all things school academics? Is it to have emotionally healthy kids? Is it to raise kids that love Jesus? And so where that aligns with what our big picture is. Obviously for us, like our main goal is we want to raise kids that love Jesus and make that a part, the center of their lives, and making sure that we are modeling that is, the pillar, that is what we're basing all of our decisions off of.
Correct. Yeah. That is the number one objective. The number one goal is we want to raise kids that love Jesus, and that's the center of their life, whatever they do, right? Yeah. Whether they are a professional athlete or a teacher or a police officer or a pastor, whatever the case is, a nurse. So the center of everything is, man, I want my kid to love Jesus, and whatever he ends up doing, that's all secondary to him loving and serving Jesus with everything that he has. So when it comes to sports, activities, man, there are kind of things that are non-negotiables for us. And I'm not saying this is easy, and I'm not saying we have it perfect, right? But, for us, our kids do one sport at a time, right? And that is with 3 boys, and only 2 of them are in the age of sports right now. That's incredibly difficult in and of itself. But so we don't want to say you can't do anything, but we also don't want to say you can do everything you want to do, right? And so I'd say the second part of that is we do the best we can to turn those things into family activities, right? We're going to practice. We're all going to go to practice together. We have a game. We're all going to go to the game together. That doesn't mean it's easy to do. It's actually, that's incredibly difficult, but it's more valuable for us to spend that time together than it is to, spread across town. And there's times where we have to do that. We have to divide and conquer and do these different things. We're actually dealing with this right now with, our 2 older boys in 2 different sports. And you were wise enough to kind of say, hey, let's actually try to do these on the same night so that we're not, having multiple nights of
giving up another night of family time. And it's so easy to do. And I think the damage here is telling each other that it's only for a season, but you're setting up habits in a lifetime of seasons. Yeah. And again, for us, would it be cool if one of our kids is a professional athlete one day? Or sure, but we know that more importantly, even if they are or aren't or whatever, we want that to be centered on the time that we spend together as a family, our time with Jesus, and modeling that. And so we create these non-negotiables. I mean, we shared that, earlier on a podcast about the family dinners and how hectic and crazy they are. But that in such a short time, our kids have learned that, oh, this is a thing. And, oh, mom and dad, you missed this thing tonight. Well, why didn't we have this thing tonight? And starting to hold us accountable for that, which is really, really neat. So it is incredibly difficult to do that. I think where we see a lot of the strain that it starts to put on the marriage, not just the family, is a lot of that whole divide and conquer mentality. Really, it just turns into time away from each other. I mean, so, we don't have, it's not a blueprint, and the same thing doesn't work for everybody, but just trying to keep those principles in mind so that you're not sacrificing, keeping God.
And the reality, and I'd say the non-negotiables for us are, hey, we are going to go to church together on Sundays. We are going to have family time together on Sunday afternoons, right? Like those are the non-negotiables, right? And so the reality is what you model for your kids is what they end up doing. So if you allow, your child to not go to church because they have a baseball tournament, or you're going to allow your kid to consistently skip out on, family time because they have this thing that needs to get done, or whatever the case is, right? What you're doing is you're telling them that it's really not that important,
Mm-hmm.
because the reality is they're going to go to college,
Mm-hmm.
and Sunday morning is going to roll around. Are they going to get up and go to church? Probably not, because it wasn't that important when they were growing up. Are they going to prioritize going to church? Probably not. It wasn't modeled for them. It wasn't the value that was instilled in them. So, and again, like, we are raising adults, or the goal is to raise adults. And so we're just going to set them up as best we can. And we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to get it perfect.
Yep.
Ultimately, they're going to make their own decisions as adults,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm going to model and try to set them up as best I can.
Absolutely. Great answer. I love that saying about, you can see where somebody spends their money. You look at their bank statement.
Yeah.
It's true about your calendar. So like, if you're like, oh yeah, like we try to go to church and we, this is important to us. You can say that all day long. But when you look at your calendar and where do you and your spouse and your family spend your time, weeknight in, weeknight out, weekend in, weekend out, that's your priority. So keep that in mind, with this and as you move forward.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, next question.
All right.
Should you make your kids go to church? Part 2, should you make your teenagers go to youth group?
Okay.
Why not?
Well, I think piggying back off the last question, my short answer is yes. And I'll explain that a little bit more. But again, the forefront of our mind, what's my goal? And as long as our kids live in our home, they will do the things, have the rhythms that we value and we believe are important. I believe going to church is very important. I believe having family time is very important. I believe having community with other believers is very important. So we are going to model that, and we aren't just going to model it. You are going to participate in that activity as well.
Sure.
Because I like to think, for, everybody's kids in different ways are picky eaters.
Sure.
And if I just let my kids eat whatever they would want, they would eat chicken nuggets, hot dogs,
candy, Prime for all the drinks.
Yeah, Prime. They would just drink Prime all day, every day, right? Like, I'm not going to do that. Like, a reasonable parent would not do that. A reasonable parent is going to say, no, here's some fruit, here's some vegetables, here's some healthy snacks that you need to eat, right? And they don't like it. At first, right?
Sure.
They're just like, oh, like, this is awful,
Why do you hate me?
Yeah, exactly. And you don't look at that and go, oh my gosh, I hate my child for making them eat vegetables.
I am awful.
Yeah. And no, you say, no, I'm the adult. I know what's best, and I know what is healthy for you. And so I'd say the same thing with your spiritual walk, right? If your kid doesn't want to go to church, and I'm talking elementary age, right? And they don't want to go to church, and you feel like you're dragging them every time. Man, think of that. Like, you might be dragging him, but like, the Lord's going to continue. He's going to use that eventually. Right. And so, I'd say, with the vegetable analogy, it's also, the goal is not to have them eat and like every vegetable that's also available.
They won't.
They will not. But the goal is to have them eat healthy food and eat vegetables. And so if there is a vegetable that they like cucumbers and carrots, awesome. Here are cucumbers and carrots. We're going to crank these things out, right? But I'm not just going to keep throwing peppers at you until you eat a pepper. So I say that to say, if there are things that your kids gravitate towards, and that they are spiritually growing from, and they're biblical and they're gospel centered, and they're healthy, they're trusted.
Yeah, absolutely.
By all means, lean into that.
Yeah.
Like, you should lean into it. I'd say this: if you go to a church that doesn't have a good kids ministry or a good youth program, and your kids hate it, find a church that your kids love.
Absolutely. A lot of parents ask us, their kids, especially getting into the middle school or high school age, the youth and things like that, they're like, well, they want to go to youth group, but they want to go to their friend's youth group, and it's not our church. Is that okay?
Sure.
And to William's point, like, yes, like as long as you are comfortable with that family and know that this church is a good church, yes, let them go,
Sure.
In a space where they want to go. You want to feed that desire, that excitement and things like that.
Gosh,
and
yeah.
that may look different. But I think the detriment is to saying, well, yeah, we're dragging them every week. And gosh, if they hate it, then I'm just going to, raise this kid that's going to be resentful to me because we always made them go. And that's, and you go down this whole what if. And I think that does much more damage to them and is such a disservice to them than bringing them. God, like William said, God will use that. God will speak to them. He will minister to them.
Sure.
Your role as the parent is to bring them because you only have them for a certain amount of time.
And it ain't very long.
They will grow up. Our kids are growing up fast. They're going to go to college. They're going to move out. They're going to make their own choices. We only hope and pray,
Sure.
can only hope and pray that they, make those good choices and that they
yeah.
make them for themselves one day, right? That's our goal. So keeping that in mind.
Exactly. And I'd say use discernment around that, right? If you are dragging them to a kids program and they aren't liking it, check it out. Make sure it's appropriate, age appropriate, and it is engaging or whatever the case is. Maybe there is a change that needs to be made. I'm so thankful for Delaney and our kids team, Engage and our youth team, and what they do to make the gospel and the Bible so relatable for age appropriate kids, and for all of our kids volunteers and everybody that does all that. So, continue to allow that. So yeah, I would have no hesitation or feel any sort of guilt to say, no, you're coming to church.
Yeah. And I understand. I know that, this will be true for us one day. Like your kids are not going to like everything that you have them do, make them do, ask them to do.
They don't know.
Right. And so being faithful in that, thinking of creative ways, like, letting your kids invite a friend to church. If that makes them more excited about whatever, let them come and offer to pick them up, things around it so that you are helping build that for them and getting them there for sure.
I love it.
Yep.
All right. That's it for this week. Thank you guys for joining us. Asking for a Friend, episode 4. Hope this was helpful.
Yes.
As always, please text your questions in to 94000.
Yes. Next week, we hope to talk some about technology and phones and kids and how those affect families and marriages too.
Yep.
So if you have any questions about that or, around that, let us know. But please text your questions into 94000.
Awesome. See you guys.